Mr. Chairman, we are live.
Super. Thank you very much. We're just talking about the Illini's massively big win over USC last night. And that Caleb Williams was there, who got a standing ovation from both the Illinois and the USC fans. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending the RTA's meeting of the Board of Directors. Just want to review a couple of guidelines, which I know our board members are, I hope, familiar with. But for the members who are here in person, thank you as always for your amazing attendance. Please turn your microphones on when you wish to speak and off when you are done, so that the microphones are limited to one on at a time. And I'll call on those of you who have questions or comments if you're here in person. For the directors calling in remotely, keep your audio on mute as much as possible because we do record these meetings and we don't want any background noise. When you have a question or comment, just raise your virtual hand and the board secretary will call on you one at a time. And if you can do it, remember to lower your hand after you're finished speaking. With that said, I will now officially call the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Regional Transportation Authority for Northeastern Illinois to order. And will everyone who's in attendance please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Madam Secretary, I don't know how your voice is. Are you or somebody else going to call the roll? Leanne.
I'm going to pinch hit for Joey since she has laryngitis. So you get to hear my voice a little more today. So calling attendance, Director Alvarez. Here. Director Carey. Here. Director Colson. Here. Director Gorman. Here. Director Groven. Here. Director Jenkins.
Here.
Director Katarik. Here. Director Lewis. Director Mondero.
Here.
Director Rotondo.
Here.
Director Ross, Director Ryan. Here. Director Saga. Director Sonoyka. Here. Director Walker. Here. Chairman Dillard.
Present.
We have 13 present, 1 remote, and 3 absent.
Excellent. Now that we've established we have a physical quorum and our board secretary has received notice from Director Jenkins, I heard you, Tasha, on the phone, indicating that she cannot attend in person. Pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, she's deemed admitted unless anybody has an objection. Director Jenkins is admitted. Item 3. Is the approval of the minutes from the board meeting held on January 15th of 2026. And Leanne, you want to read us a statement regarding the executive session from that day?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As required under the Illinois Open Meetings Act, 5 Illinois CS 120-206, Section D, the Board of Directors met and determined that the need for confidentiality still exists as to all the remaining closed executive session meeting minutes. Based on its review, the board is not recommending that any of the minutes be released at this time. The board is recommending also the destruction of the verbatim recordings from executive session meetings between December 2023 and July 2024.
Excellent. Thank you. Any comments or corrections to the minutes that we had on January 15th? If not, how about a motion in a second? We approve, Director Walker moves, seconded by that we approve the minutes from January 15th. And Leanne, why don't you, if you would, take a roll call?
Director Alvarez. Director Carey.
Aye.
Director Colson. Director Gorman.
Aye.
Director Groven.
Aye.
Director Jenkins.
Aye.
Director Katarik.
Aye.
Director Mondero.
Yes.
Director Rotondo.
Yes.
Director Ryan.
Yes.
Director Sonoyka.
Aye.
Director Walker.
Yes.
Chairman Dillard.
Present, yes. Director Sonoyka and Director Walker, thank you for your motions in second. And with that, our minutes from January 15th are approved. We're going to shuffle the agenda around just a little bit as Jim Derwinski, the excellent executive director from Metra, has his own board meeting this morning. And we're going to have him present item 6D, which is the proposed railroad rehabilitation improvement financing loan for Metra's Bridge Improvement Program. And then we'll go back to the regular agenda after that. Thank you for walking down Jackson Boulevard to see us this morning.
Beautiful morning out today to be walking in the city of Chicago in February. Thank you for having me here today, and pleasure of being here. And thank you for the accommodation. Didn't realize we were going to move me up in the agenda. So I'll do my best to take you through what message I'd like to at least send today. Last time I saw you was November. In some respects, a lot hasn't changed. We're talking about bridges, talk about anything you want. Bridges got 4 months older in the last 4 months, and I'll keep talking about that. So big picture, as you all know, state of good repair backlog is bigger than any of our funding sources have. Metra's is around 12 to 13 billion. CTA's is around 17 billion. So that's about $30 billion just in the state of good repair. So these are the things that make the railroad, both CTA and Metra, run today. This is not these improvements. These are not expansions. This is just the physical items that make the railroad run today. And the sources that we see coming in are not able to keep up with it. Metra's bridges account for 25% of its state of good repair backlog. So I've talked to you about bridges before. We've been out trying to find other sources. Matter of fact, Senator Duckworth, Congressman Quigley recently dropped a bill in Congress looking for a support for a bridge program, possibly during surface transportation authorization, and possibly this year. That'd be exciting, but again, that doesn't even fill the needs. That's going to be probably more of a seed program for all commuter rails in the nation. So our bridges, again, 926 bridges we operate over every single day. We own 446 of them. 210 of them we've identified absolutely have to be worked on. How did we get there? Well, not too long ago, we decided to endeavor in a plan about modernization. So in 2014, our board put together the rolling stock modernization program, which also included the necessity to look at our bridges. Since then, we've started buying new rail cars. We've funded 200 of 500. We started buying the zero emissions train sets. I'm very excited about those. Those are fully funded. We've got 8 of those on the way here to Chicago. We should have our first one here in October. We've been funding 42 what's called SD70 locomotives. They're AC traction, they're tier 3 emissions, they're more fuel efficient. We need about another 40 of those. The first 42 are funded, the other 40 aren't. So that takes care of like the higher level needs of rolling stock. I took this job in 2018, and in 2019 we started saying, well, we can't just talk about bridges. We have to know which bridges to go after. So we started having a broader conversation. That's the first time I brought it to you, the RTA, our bridge dilemma, and the fact that we've only been rebuilding bridges about 3 a year for the last 9 decades. And in the last 5 years, we've only rebuilt 2 bridges. However, we've got a lot of work in what I call the pipe. So in 2020 and 21, we did a full assessment of bridges, not just looking at age. And there's 14 different factors that went into what's called a sufficiency rating. And then in 22, we formally launched what we believe is a viable bridge improvement program. So what I want to talk to you about today is this RIF loan is $230 million that we're looking to seek to secure to finish funding 19 bridges that are not part of the 210. Again, we consider those bridges to be already in design, development, going toward construction, need final construction money. So those 19 bridges don't even address the 210. The 210 starts what we call the Bridge Improvement Program. And we look at bridges in basically 3 different phases. Like almost every big project, you've got preliminary engineering and NITA. That's the cheap part. Then you get final design. That's pretty expensive. And then you get construction. That's really expensive. So this $230 million helps fill in all the gaps for 19 bridges that are currently in the pipe. It includes bridges on the UP North line, includes bridges on the Milwaukee lines, includes bridges on the Rock Island lines. That work needs to happen right now. What's at risk is some of that design work can go old. Some of the NEPA work can go old. And certainly as we're looking to not lose any construction season, we want to make sure that we've got those bridges as they get to construction contracts, that the funding's there. Obviously, we have to follow all the rules. So the program itself, as I've talked about before, Ideally, we do double this, but realistically, if we did 5 bridges rehab, 5 bridges replace a year for 20 years, that takes care of those 200 bridges. That's a 20-year program. Right now, it needs about $160 million a year to feed that program. That'll, of course, grow with escalation. Right now, we're funding what we call Group 1, Group 2, and Group 3 bridges for PE NIPA. That's in our capital program that you've all approved, and so that work continues. Again, those are outside of the 210. So why did we look at a BAB loan or a Build America Bureau loan? These are specifically designed for long-lived assets. There's been questions about why do you pick RIF over TIFIA? Just really quick, RIF are 100% financing. They're really designed for railroad assets, long-lived railroad assets. They have a much longer maturity on the loan. They're 100% funded. TIFIA loans, they only fund 49%. And there's other definite advantages. But one of the great things about the BAB programs are it's the Treasury, 30-year Treasury rate plus a little bit more. So right now it's currently just under 5%. There's no prepayment penalty. It's kind of like a line of credit. You only borrow what you need. And if you pay it back, then you're not paying interest on anything. Unlike a bond where you have to pay all that interest on the money right now today. The one thing that does restrict you in a BAB loan program is you have to only work on what is in your program. So if we say we want these 10 bridges in this phase of the program, or these 19 bridges in this particular case, that's what we have to work on. If we were to find additional funding, we just wouldn't borrow some of that money. So that's why we'd like to, again, ask and start talking about the $230 million loan that we've been working on. And the question is, why now? Why and why now? I think we've explained why. The idea of delaying this program, there's cost escalation. And we're at the point in the program where we've engaged the Build America Bureau. We've spoken with them, and we're at a point where we have an engagement letter. So the engagement letter, if once we sign it, then goes to the Build America Bureau, and it takes us to pay back their lawyers that are going to do the due diligence work and the underwriting of the loan. Ultimately, if we were ever to move forward with a loan, we understand under the new NITA law, we cannot take out a loan. So we immediately talked to the Build America Bureau talking about what if we shifted this to the upper agency, shifted it to NITA. And they said, absolutely, this happens all the time. This is perfect time to do it since we haven't executed any of the terms. And then the due diligence work wouldn't be done on Metra, it would be done on the region. So this is a great time to start this preliminary work and get it moving. It takes several months. Questions go back and forth. It's about $400,000 to $600,000 is what they estimate for that. Those attorney fees, Metra has budgeted that since that's the program we were moving toward before the NITA bill passed. So again, this is what we're looking to do in the next couple of years that we engaged with the Build America Bureau. We began our program. We got to the point where the pause is there, NITA passed. And we very clearly understand under legislation, we cannot take out a loan. NITA can take out a loan. So our recommendation again is to continue to work with the Build America Bureau, work with the RTA until the RTA magically becomes NITA on June 1, and then work with NITA as they do the due diligence process in Washington. And we move forward with the execution of the letter. And then we would also not ever take away NITA's decision to actually execute the loan. So at that point in time, whenever the terms or the conditions of the loan, that is 100% exclusively NITA's decision. They could say no, but ultimately, like I pointed out in the beginning, we have a need. And so what we'd like to, again, do is really talk about what are some of the other options. And I think one of the other options would be to do traditional bonding or to do another dedicated funding stream, possibly from the state of Illinois. I know I don't have any of those keys. I know I don't have any of those authorities, but we do need to find a way to start really putting a dent into this bridge program. Like I said, the bridges are 4 months older now. 20 years from now, even if we were to start this program, those bridges, some of those bridges are going to be 160 years old. And so what happens with those bridges? It's not like they're just aging. They actually start aging exponentially. And that's the problem that we have right now. They're at the point where the metals are getting very thin. It's very costly to go do rehab work. Put that picture of a truck up there. We get hit about 40 times a year. We got hit Wednesday. When you get hit, trains have to stop. Then you bring out inspectors, and then they can determine whether or not the bridge is shifted or not, or there's damage to the bridge. And eventually, trains can be walked over the bridge until a certified inspector says you can do this. What does that do to the roadway? It blocks the roadway. And so you're inconveniencing all the passengers on top, you're inconveniencing the roadway and the communities below, and this happens all the time. So again, I say, why now? And the question is, why not now? Bridge strikes are only one of the obviously considerations that I've been putting in place. The amount of money we'd spend in due diligence right now is very minuscule on the money that we actually need to execute the program. As I pointed out, it's almost $3 billion of our state of good repair needs. And the fact that cost escalations alone within 1 year will make this very much look like, well, if we would have spent that executed alone, paying for something now with today's rates is going to be much more economical for the region. So with that, I'd like to stop. With me today is Brian Stepp, Director of Grants. If anybody knows where the money is at Metra, it's this guy or back here. And then John Morris is next. Brian didn't come up. And then John Morris, if you want to talk about alternate financing, funding, this is John Morris is our CFO. So any questions from this body?
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Director Coles.
Do the freight railroads contribute to this bridge work at all?
So any bridge that we have shared use on, yes. So like an example, UP West Bridge, we come up with individual agreements on each project, and we might be, today, we're 40% of traffic, they're 60% of traffic, and then what we do a lot of times, since they like using what's called government money or other people's money, what they'll do is they'll go after these discretionary grant programs, and they'll say, we'd like to go after this one. So they'll put the money toward local match, and then we'll go in it to combine together. And then if we get the discretionary grant, then that's, they're only paying for a portion of the bridge. On bridges where, the worst ones, where it's owned by the freight railroad, but they run no freight trains on it, the UP North bridges, it's right now 100% on us to upgrade those bridges, make them safer.
What do you do with BNSF, which is a little different than the rest of your lines?
So the BNSF, it's a shared use corridor. It's the same. We work with them individually on a specific bridge. BNSF and Metra Electric have another unique thing. They don't have just traditional bridges. They have viaducts. And so viaducts, in a lot of ways, they have a different corrosion erosion rate. And so we do work with them. We've actually have a long-term program going with them to try to identify longer-term capital needs.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Director Mondero.
Thanks. Hi, Jim. Couple questions I have. First question is regarding RTA and our capital plan. Like, so how have you presented these 19 bridges before to the RTA and the capital plan? Have we approved it? And then the question, I guess, for Leanne is, in terms of bridges, like for CTA, do we have for CTA and Metra, like all the worst bridges in the worst condition? Do we know which ones those are, and how is that teed up, and how does that jibe with what Jim's current ask is?
Yeah, so to start off, yes, you've approved it in the program. What we do is when we put in the program, it might say, preliminary engineering work, bridge program work. So that's like that group 1, group 2, group 3 of the program. Those are funded right now through the 5-year capital program. These other bridges, like the UP North bridges, that's been a piecemeal. That project's going to push 400 million easily. And a great example is last time we did the same project, we did 11 bridges. It cost 153 million, and we did Ravenswood Station. So you can see how much cost escalations occurred just in 15 years. And that's really kind of the driver. But yes, all of these bridges are part of the capital program. We try to, as bridges advance, go from preliminary engineering to final design, then we try to find and move the construction money into there when it's needed. As your other question, as far as the bridge ratings, I don't know anything about CTA and how they do their bridge ratings. And I'm not going to be coy here. I'll offline, I can give you more detail. But at the end of the day, the FRA right now has a very large increase in bridge inspections across the country. They're taking 120 of their inspectors and they're training them how to do bridge inspection. Currently, they have 2 certified bridge inspectors. The reason they're doing this is because they want to look at all the bridges. By FRA's decree, railroads are not supposed to be talking about the bridge conditions in a public way for very good reasons. So to answer your question, yes, we absolutely know which bridges need to go first, and we did that through our sufficiency rating, but no, we don't publicly state that. The 19 bridges that are in the program, those are public. Those are in the process of moving forward. But the bridges that are in the next phases of the program, they can change too, because we're required federally to annually inspect the bridges. And if a bridge all of a sudden notices, say, the abutment wall has an issue or there's a different level of corrosion, and we're going to put, say, $1 million into the bridge in repairs, it might cost $10 million to replace it, we might shift that in the program. So this is, since 2022, this has been a pretty dynamic but precise look at the bridges.
So to speak to it in terms of sort of the broader regional, each agency does their own sort of review ranking. And as Jim alluded to, it is dynamic. It does change year over year. They do update across, we do have work that we do, coordination across asset inventory for all 3 agencies. In terms of, though, then saying, okay, Metra's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, CTA's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which one goes first over that? The region has not ever done that. And somewhat because it's not even necessarily apples to apples comparisons, right? Sometimes too, a bridge or a project or a program might advance because of availability of funding and sort of an opportunity to go after some competitive grant. If something becomes available, this one might move forward. So there's a whole host of sort of decision points beyond even just the ranking sort of from an inventory standpoint. But I think when actually later, if Jim didn't have a meeting today, we would have done a bit of a presentation. We're going to be doing later in the agenda a presentation on sort of capital prioritization. Those of you who've been on the board for a while have known that there's been a lot of conversation about how do we sort of advance and amp that up to take a more regional prioritization process potentially to get there. NITA is actually going to require that kind of work. And so we're not there yet, but it is something that we will need to work towards as a region collectively, with all the, as Jim alluded to and I talked about too, the complexities of not just the asset, the condition, the deterioration rates year over year, environmental circumstances, et cetera, but also availability of funding.
Thank you. Director Kuterik.
Thanks, Chairman. And first a comment and then some questions. This is a really important program. I think, we've told you that, Jim, before. We want to support this. I think it's encouraging. You're looking at alternative financing and different ways to approach it. I think our theme really has been, again, setting NITA up for success, building the foundation, not building the house. And I think that this is in line with it. So from my perspective, I'd say it's, go forward and do that due diligence. I'd encourage you to bring every CFO at the table, have everyone have eyes on it. We know CTA has used the Build America Bureau and USDOT for TIFIA lending before. So from my perspective, I think doing this due diligence and getting this set up for NITA shouldn't wait any longer. The first is a data request to piggyback off of Director Colson. Could you share with us just sort of a memo with, later on, of the formula that's used for each of these bridges in the context of what the chairman had asked? And then also tell us a little bit about the agreements that dictate that formula, the age of those agreements, when they're coming up for renegotiation. Just think that's a critical sort of piece for us to understand. The second set of questions are really probably for John, are specific questions about the RIF program and the way that the credit works. Can you tell us how risk premium works, which is a unique thing for the RIF program, and what that might cost as you're entering into a potential agreement with US?
Yeah, the risk premium will be based on the outcome of the due diligence, and they will determine how much above the treasury we would have to pay. Although most of the loans they're getting shoot to not have any risk premium, which was what we would shoot for, so that we would be paying the 30-year treasury rate on it. but it's a small amount based on credit worthiness of the agency. We don't have a credit rating right now, so we don't know how we're gonna fit in that. And NITA would have a credit rating, and then it would be their credit rating that the risk premium would be based upon.
The second question is refinancing. I know that the city of Chicago has had some issues with refinancing TIFIA loans. Can you talk about how some of the challenges or opportunities if you find yourself or NITA does 5, 10 years down the road and a refinancing opportunity comes about?
There's not a prepayment. There's not a prepayment penalty on these. There's a 5-year, so you don't start paying for them until 5 years after the completion of the project. Obviously, you could pay earlier if you want, but you're not required for the first till 5 years after completion. So you have the ability to defer the payments. You have the ability to accelerate the payments with no penalty. So if any point we need to float a bond, or NITA, because we have no authority, needs to utilize a bond, they can do that in order to accelerate the payment or stretch out the payments beyond the 35-year period.
And then the last note is, as you're redoing these bridges, what opportunities do you see to improve the pedestrian and street infrastructure beneath it?
Yeah, and one of the examples that I used, I think I showed you in November, was Grayland. So, and Grayland was a great example. It opened up pedestrian, it opened up bikeway, it put in different mediums in the center because it went from 4 columns holding the bridge up to 1 column holding the bridge up with modern engineering design. The challenge with that one, again, was we were tied to a station. So that was one of the ones that got moved up in the program, not because of its sufficiency, but because of the grant application that went in that tied to the station. Because all that funding came together, that bridge got done. But yeah, every single time that I've went out and seen a bridge that's been replaced next to an old bridge, it is night and day. Is how much taller it can be. Take out the center stanchions, that's a bad picture. That one just shows like a 1-lane road. But there are places, you know, obviously with multi-lane roads, you've got these stanchions right in the middle, which you don't look too much at them. But they're holding the bridges up.
Just one comment on credit rating. My guess is NITA will probably absorb the credit rating of the RTA. And no matter what people think of the RTA, we have the highest credit rating you're probably ever going to get as a unit of local government in a state like Illinois. So, you know, NITA, Metra, and others can thank the RTA for having a near perfect credit rating, which will probably be absorbed into NITA. So when you're out there, my guess is you're going to have a very strong credit rating thanks to the RTA's years of existence. Director Groven.
Thanks, Jim. When you've come in the past, you've told us, because this is obviously a lot of concern when you're talking about old bridges and accelerated corrosion. I think you have in place kind of an amped up inspection process as you're waiting for this funding to come through. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we've actually brought in-house, we've increased our inspectors, increased their training, and then increased their frequency out on the bridges. We're now starting to look at technology. Is there a way that we can use very clever technology to monitor what's called stress and load on the bridges as the train goes over it? And we're working with a very high-tech company to try to deploy possibly the first bridge monitoring systems on, since, again, I look at these numbers and I'm like, even if we were to start moving everything forward today, 20 years from now is still 20 years from now. And I think 20 years from now is conservative. So yes, we do increase inspections. If we do find things that need attention, we either do further inspections or we start scheduling those repairs. And a lot of times those repairs, unfortunately, it's kind of money spent well right now, but you're going to throw it away someday because you need to replace.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? I just have a couple. Speaking of 20 years ago, I was in the Senate and gave an impassioned plea for the passage of Governor George Ryan's Build Illinois program, talking about bridges, so many over 100 years old, and timber bridges. That's 20 years ago. And so this problem's not going to go away. there can't be a higher priority, I think, than bridge safety. I know you're asking, basically maybe using some operations money for capital, but you pointed out 40 bridge hits a year delays operations. So there's clearly a real nexus between operations in this particular capital program. Make sure, like Director Koteric said, you're talking to everybody but the governor's office. Make sure you're talking to the governor's office, who is obviously very involved in the transition to NITA, so they're not surprised by something like this. But anything you or Chairman McMahon need me to do, I'm fully supportive of exploring this option. I thank you for your creativity, your financial creativity on this. But this is just a massive priority, and it's got to be done, and it only gets exponentially more and more expensive. Anything else? Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Say hello and give our respects to your board and your chairman, Mr. McMahon, who's phenomenal.
Thank you for your support.
Thanks, Jim, and Brian and John. Okay, item 4, I guess, is next, and that's the public comments segment of our meeting. Any comments received now will be read into the record. Leanne or Joey, we have any written comments?
We have no written comments.
Okay. And anybody else that's here today? We have a list of anybody that wants to speak. And I will remind you, our rules allow for 3 minutes to speak.
I can't see the screen.
You
So
have 3 people, right?
we have more than 3 people.
3,
We have
okay.
3 people signed up,
In
pardon
advance.
my voice, in advance. So the first person is Vanessa Sanchez. She might be on the phone on the Zoom call.
Okay.
So just give her, there's a phone over there.
And I know we have Jonathan Haven and Christopher Ramos, who's also signed up. Yep.
Why
Director
don't we
Moore.
go to John, if Vanessa Sanchez is not there right now, why don't we go to Jonathan Haven, and then if Ms. Sanchez comes online, then we can insert her into the conversation.
Director Gorman, you
Was-
have a question?
Wasn't there there was a written testimony from somebody written?
That was just a public comment. that-
Oh, it's- okay.
Yeah.
That we sent to you,
Yes.
yes. And then they're posted as well.
Yep.
So is Jonathan Haven here?
Come on up, Jonathan.
Okay,
Good morning.
come on up. Who's there?
No, sorry. That we know.
And just turn on the microphone and say your name.
Good morning. My name is John Haven, and I serve on the Metra ADA Advisory Committee. I am a behavioral clinician who has spent almost a decade working with patients with disabilities. I am myself a person with disabilities, and I am the primary caregiver for my spouse, who is also disabled. First, I just want to commend all of those who are inside and outside this room that fought to continue to include the rideshare access program in the taxi access program in the RTA budget. I want to thank all of the allies to those of us in the disability community who could have been advocating for other campaigns, but showed up for us. Too often, organizations and unions do not consider our needs in the fight for equity. And there were, in fact, those who openly showed us they don't care for those of us with disabilities, as they tried to kill these vital programs. I and many of us in the disability community are very pro-union. We're not a monolith, but many of us are pro-union. And I'm quite upset that some unions fighting rightly for working Americans are also working to dismantle programs for the disabled. Rather than fighting to get rid of these vital programs that we need, we really would like to talk with them, with you. I just want to quote one union leader in the Chicago Tribune who said, "If the government was going to pay for my Uber to go to the Sox game on Wednesday, I'd be all about that too." This statement enables a false narrative that when people with disabilities fight to be accommodated, we are asking for special treatment. I've heard this false dominant narrative my whole life, and I will not stand for it. Let's just briefly dig into this. If we were to go to a White Sox game one day, when should we schedule Pace Paratransit to pick us up? We don't know how long a game might last. It might be 2.5 hours. It might be 3.5 hours. So let's say we schedule it for 3.5 hours and then the game ends after 2.5. Well, we're waiting for potentially an hour or longer to get picked up by Pace Paratransit. The RAP and TAP programs are much more reliable for us. As a RAP user whose spouse uses the wheelchair accessible TAP, I am grateful to RTA and PACE for continuing to fund these programs and now agreeing to move the mark from 30 rides a month to 40 rides a month. These programs were vital in getting the NITA bill passed as well. Many legislators were not on board fully until we brought up these needed programs that needed funding immediately. And that is one of the things that pushed to getting the NITA bill passed. So again, I want to thank those who have been helping us to get there. And I want to continue to say that these programs are very good for preventing isolation for people. Many more people are able to go to jobs on time, able to go see friends and family without having to plan a day ahead. And I don't think that that is a privilege. I think that that's something we deserve in the disabled community. So I want to thank, again, all of those here who have been fighting for this. And I hope that we can continue to fund these as we transition from the RTA to the NITA. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Christopher Ramos.
Chris Ramos, Community Organizer, Access Living. 5 years ago, the RTA released its ADA Paratransit Innovation Study to improve sustainability of the service. Within this action plan, in a section titled A Way Forward, it recommended piloting a same-day consumer choice model using non-dedicated providers. That recommendation became what we know as RAP, modeled after the successful TAP program. We thank you for your vision then, and we hope it continues now. The program was an overwhelming success. For the first time, riders with disabilities had access to reliable, same-day transportation without navigating a burdensome dispatch system or negotiating pickup windows hours in advance. A person who needs to get to the hospital the same day, whether for an urgent appointment or a change in medical condition, can do so independently. The ADA was written 35 years ago, in a world before smartphones, GPS tracking, and app-based ride-hailing technology that didn't require next-day requests or negotiating pickup times. They were just trying to bring us closer to equal. Well, we're not there yet. Traditional paratransit remains essential, but no single model can meet the diverse needs of our community. Sometimes buses and trains are too crowded. Sometimes a paratransit trip that should take 30 minutes turns into a multi-hour ride due to shared routing. Sometimes a rider simply needs flexibility and independence. A modern system must include multiple options. Of course, our community welcomes any increase in the number of rides, whether that be 40 or beyond. Yet we also know the system remains fragmented. One of our members was recently redirected by their Medicaid transportation provider to Pace for trips, illustrating how difficult it can be for riders to navigate disconnected services. Reliability should not depend on which funding stream covers the trip. Riders should not have to decode the system to access mobility. Sometimes the trains and buses are simply too crowded, and sometimes you don't want to be driven in a paratransit bus for hours just to get somewhere 30 minutes away. Finally, we must recognize that accessibility depends on a stable workforce. Supporting efforts such as those led by the Illinois Drivers Alliance to create a pathway to unionization and collective bargaining strengthens the very system riders rely on. Riders and drivers are not in opposition. We share an interest in a reliable, dignified transportation network. A system that values disability access must also value the workers who make mobility possible. I want to thank the disability leaders who spoke up when RAP and TAP was threatened with devastating cuts. This program represents modernization, flexibility, and independence. It reflects what access should look like in 2026, not 1990. Thank you for recognizing that a truly equitable transportation system requires multiple tools to meet real-world needs. We are in this fight for better opportunities together, riders and drivers, and we need a system that values both disability access and the workforce that makes mobility possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos, and thank you for acknowledging that it was the innovation of the RTA that created this program, and your testimony is very, very well taken, and my guess is we all agree with it.
And next we'd invite up Jesus. Unfortunately, I can't read your last name off the list, but come on up.
A familiar face. Welcome again.
Okay. Okay, good. It's Campuzano, but trust me, I don't expect you to remember that. It's kind of hard to pronounce for some people. And thank you to all of you, first of all, for having me here again and for letting me speak. First, I want to thank you all for increasing, or you guys will increase the rides to 40 rides. But I want to take it a step further. Some of us who use the RAP program, like myself, don't use all our rides in 1 month. You know, because we want to stretch it and make it last as much as possible for the rest of the month. But when you don't use those rides, the rides are reset back to 30. In this case, it's going to be 40. But what I am requesting is that you go a step further. For those rides that I don't use the month before, how about rolling over those rides that I don't use the month before? That way, I have enough rides to make it through the month, and I don't have to be here complaining about how many rides I have. 40 is great. If we can take it a step further and rolling those unused rides to the following month, that would be even better. At least for a whole year, you know? And then the following year, well, if you don't use your rides, well, hey, you got to start all over again. Back to those 40 or 30, whatever that is. And if I use those rides, that's great. If I don't, well, how about letting them like accumulate to a certain number? Obviously, you're not going to let it accumulate to 600 rides, but what I'm trying to say is having those rides roll over helps make a difference in our community. That way we can get to places we need to get to versus having to decide, will I use this to go to work, or will I use this to spend time with family, or will I use this to go to the hospital because I have an emergency? The choices are hard for sometimes in our community, and having to choose is not fair. That's why I'm proposing that idea of rolling the rides over. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your suggestion, and I have multiple friends that have your name, so thanks for being here, as always. What do we have?
Curtis Harris.
Curtis.
Good morning. I want to thank you for showing up this morning. I want to thank you for having me to speak in front of you again. I know you remember me as well, Cub Cat from last summer when they were in a pennant race that reached all the way to the National League Division Series. That was a good run. But we want to take it a step further to the World Series title this year. Let's hope that happens. Thanks for recognizing that when I spoke last summer. But anyway, besides the point, I want to say that I want to thank you for the proposal to increase the monthly wrap rides to 40 a month. that's a step forward, but I'm gonna propose too that we increase it up to 60 a month because 30 and 40 is really not enough. I depend on RAP to get me to my mental health treatment because I've been in recovery for 19 years. I'm going to continue to use RAP. I also use RAP to see my medical care provider, my family and friends. And it's the independence where you can get on a daily, on the same day, as opposed to using RTA, ADA-paced paratransit. We have to call a day in advance, which could turn to a 2-hour ride and a 30-minute or even a 20-minute ride from where you're going. Because some months I have to use PACE because I'm limited to 30 a month to get to some of these places because I have used up my RAP for emergencies. Like in November, December, I had a sick father. I had to use RAP to go to the hospital to see him. And when it's time to use, when I need to use transportation to get to my mental health recovery treatment, I end up using paratransit. Luckily, I didn't have to wait long, but it could have been worse. But the 40 rides a month increase for now is going to be a start. But I say let's propose it to at least 60 a month because I can use that to get to anywhere. And for further places like Southwest Side or South Side, it's more than 325. I have to complement pace to complement that. So I also oppose that you keep 3 rides to 325 for most of Chicagoland, like western suburbs like Bellwood, Maywood, Westchester, Oak Park, or even as far as Hammond, Indiana. Because I may want to use that to go to Horseshoe to watch a play or to place a wager on a sporting event. Because you cannot bet on Illinois college teams in this state. You have to go to Indiana to bet on Illinois Fighting Illini. And pace costs, our ride share assets cost like maybe $30 get from my home to a sports book in Indiana. Or let's say the Bears do go to Indiana, which I hope doesn't happen. It'll cost more. So I propose that we keep the $3.25 rides to everywhere, including Indiana. And I wanted to also say that we thank the state legislators for increasing funding for transportation throughout the Northeast Illinois and the state of Illinois as well. Because we're going to get money. And I want you to use that money that we're going to get to increase RAP rides to 60 a month in the next year. But 40 is a start, and thank you.
Thank you, Curtis, very much. That money will certainly help RAP that we got from our friends in Springfield. And just want to point out, I saw yesterday that Pace is returning its express bus service to Wrigley Field. So people could take the express bus on Pace to go see as Tom Ricketts promised, World Series caliber Chicago Cubs. So, and Tom says, and the White Sox too. So, Curtis, thank you very much. Really appreciate you being here again.
That's the concludes the list of people that have signed up this morning. If there's other, Michael, just confirming we're good. Nobody else has signed up to speak. Okay, thank you.
We said, thank you very much. So Leanne, let's with that go on to your executive director's report. And I thank the witnesses for being here this morning.
So good morning again, chairman, directors, and members of the public and guests who have joined us. My report will be very, very brief this morning. Moving on to, hang on. slide. All right. Update on a few legislative items before we get on to the rest of the agenda. On the federal side, on February 3rd, Congress passed the fiscal year 2026 Transportation, Housing and Urban Development Appropriations Package, which included transit funding. This bipartisan funding bill includes the majority of funding for public transportation as authorized for the fifth and final year of the IIJA, which is the Illinois Investment and Jobs Act, the last federal transportation bill. The bill provides over $21 billion for public transit in FY26, a slight increase from FY25, the FY25 enacted levels. It also fully funds the Federal Transit Administration's formula and competitive grant programs and includes $350 million line item within the Capital Investment Program, the CIG program, for CTA's Red Line Extension Project. While earmarks were removed from last year's package in 25, this year, the service boards will received over $14 million in earmarked funding for transit projects across their three systems. President Trump signed the bill into law on February 5, and members of Congress are now turning to surface transportation reauthorization discussions as their next major focus and funding priority. With respect to some of that, Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island organized a letter urging leadership on the Senate Banking Committee and Appropriations Committee to protect transit funding as reauthorization conversations continue to advance. And specifically, the letter urges funding levels for public transportation, maintaining the funding levels for public transportation, including advance appropriations, which provide the guaranteed funding. So you recall when sometimes the federal government has had a shutdown, transit funding is still flowing, and that's because of the advance appropriations. The letter was also asking that they ensure that the historic 20% split to transit from the Highway Trust Fund continue. Both, we have been talking to our delegation, and both Senators Durbin and Duckworth's offices have confirmed that they are co-signing onto this letter in support of those priorities. Finally, current FTA Administrator Marcus Molinaro announced that he will step down from the administration tomorrow, February 20. Executive Director Matt Welbus will lead, and longstanding Executive Director Matt Welbus will be leading the FTA administration until a new administrator is appointed and confirmed by the Senate. Turning to a little more local information, the deadline for state lawmakers to introduce new legislation passed February 6, with nearly 3,000 initiatives filed across both chambers of the General Assembly. Proposals have been filed related to the NITA Act, as well as ADA paratransit, bus operations, local zoning near transit. Staff is going to continue to monitor all of those pieces of potential legislation as they sort of could advance and as they would impact the transit system for the region. The next major legislative deadline is March 13, when bills need to pass from substantive committees. Governor J.B. Pritzker yesterday delivered his annual State of the State and Budget Address, outlining $56 billion proposal for state fiscal year 27. Which begins on July 1st. The proposed budget includes $747 million increase in public transportation fund, or the PTF fund, as well as additional transit capital related to the passage of the NITA Act. All other appropriations, including state reimbursements for mandated free and reduced fare programs at approximately $23 million, and ADA paratransit for about approximately 11.5 million, remain constant with previous appropriations. The governor's proposal also dedicates resources to the Illinois Department of Transportation for activities related to the transition towards NITA. The release of the governor's proposed budget is the first but an important step in the process that plays out over the next several months in the General Assembly, as legislators will aim to pass their final budget by the end of the legislative session at the end of May. So we'll keep you updated on all of that and budget negotiations as they continue. So next slide, I don't need to say next slide because I get to do it. Our agenda is pretty full. We've juggled a few things around this morning, so appreciate your patience with that. We'll start with a recap from the Citizens Advisory Board, get a couple of informational updates on NITA's transition activities, work that's underway, as well as an overview of our capital planning work that I already mentioned. And Acting President Nora Learson from CTA will join us to discuss in a little bit updates on safety. Then there's several action items on your agenda as laid out, and I will turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Leanne. Any questions or comments for the director? Yes.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, Leanne.
Sure.
I just wanted to note on the federal side and thank our Illinois congressional delegation for their support to try to resolve the funding holdup for the red line extension and for the red purple modernization. Chicago and New York are both in a pretty tense battle, and that issue was one of the last to be determined for the transportation appropriation bill. One of the questions I have for Leanne is that, APTA is the national association, your leadership there, we brought up, how can we get them more engaged in this? I was just sort of going through their website on the legislative updates. I mean, this is $13 billion. The Gateway program has been in New York is enormous. They stopped the project. They had thousands of jobs that were suspended. The courts had brought the money back. They stopped it. They brought it back. What can we do to get the national association that represents public transit to really raise this issue? I think we need as many allies and help as possible to free up this money.
So actually, I could have primed you with that question. We actually met with the officers yesterday and the senior leadership of APTA on this and more sort of all of these topics around this funding holdups, et cetera. APTA has maintained actually some pretty active dialogue sort of behind the scenes with the administration and others with the administration as well as with Gateway, with MTA, and is willing to engage as sort of needed. And we have had some additional conversation. Are there other sort of, should APTA get involved from a legal front? And I think happy to talk more offline about sort of the positioning and the thinking related to feedback we've gotten from the parties to those situations. And APTA has always sort of taken the approach of responding to that need based on, or responding to those requests as needed. I can sort of share more from sort of a legal and strategy standpoint if we wanted to talk after the meeting.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Leanne at this stage of our meeting today? If not, let's go on to 6A, which is the update on the activities of the RTA Transit Access Citizens Advisory Board. Ryan, good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Dillard, members of the Board of Directors. I'm Ryan Ruley, and I currently serve as the chair of the RTA Citizens Advisory Board. And I'll be providing an update pertaining to our last meeting held on January 26. During that meeting, Lauren Gutierrez, representing the network advocating against domestic violence, reported that a new permanent fare program for survivors of domestic violence was included in the NITA Act. She reported that the network looks forward to the implementation of the program. Kendra Johnson, Associate of Government Affairs, shared an overview of the NITA Act. Her presentation included details on new revenues, board structure changes, public safety provisions, and major reforms included in the bill. She also outlined potential changes to the Citizens Advisory Board structure. The presentation included a timeline of key implementation dates and details on initial transition planning. Doug Anderson, Manager of Budget and Business Analysis, provided an overview of the 2026 adopted budget and anticipated budget actions over the next several months. He described the estimated timing of new revenues coming to the agency in 2026, as well as projections in out years. He briefed the board on changes to the recovery ratio and how that will be affecting budgeting moving forward. Mr. Anderson also provided an overview to the service board's capital budgets and the intended approach to distribute new capital funding. He then discussed how RTA staff are working with the service boards to plan out next steps for the budget and capital planning process, resulting in the recommendations to the RTA board in the coming months. Michael Vandekreek, Director of Mobility Services, provided an overview of the recent enhancements made to the RTA's online fare programs application portal. He described various updates that were made to the portal since its origin in 2022 to streamline the application process. He then provided a demo of the site, highlighting each feature that was added. RTA CAB members asked several questions related to their concerns over the timeline and other implementation details within the NITA Act, including the rollout of the transit ambassadors, confirmation of board and committee appointments, and universal fares. Members expressed interest in continuing to be engaged throughout the transition process and once the new agency is in place. Members who have utilized RTA's online fare programs application portal provided positive feedback on the improvements that were made, and Collier County representatives expressed interest in providing updates on various county transit initiatives at our next meeting. I had suggested that staff work with RTA, Steve, and CAB members to develop a summary of concerns related to the NITA Act, which could be delivered to the NITA board after the transition takes place. The next meeting of the RTA CAB is April 27th, 2026 from 10 a.m. until noon. And this will be the last RTA CAB meeting due to the transition of RTA to NITA, resulting in the creation of a new advisory council. Happy to discuss any questions you may have. Thanks again for your time and attention.
Thank you, and thanks, Ryan, for your service as the chairman of the important group. Any
You're
other
welcome.
questions for Ryan? If not, thank you. I just want to point out to the board, he did touch on one little item that I just want to get out in public: recovery ratio. You know, it's a long way down the road before that kicks in, and I don't know whether I will be here or not, but that's something that through the transition really needs to be watched to see whether that is obtainable or not. But for all you members who are here or who will be a member of NITA, as well as the governor's office and legislators, recovery ratio is something everybody needs to really take notice of so that there's no surprises a couple of years from now. So thanks for touching on that nerve. 6B is the NITA Act implementation update from our awesome Chief of Staff, Jill Leary.
Morning, directors. Jill Leary, Chief of Staff. Here to provide today's update. Last month, we provided an overview of the NITA Act, highlighting some of the near-term changes to the transit system and key milestones that must be met in the years ahead. We also touched on the priorities for the transition and responsibilities for IDOT and other outside stakeholders. As a reminder, there's a summary available on our website with all of that information. Since your last meeting and as a next step, we've established and kicked off working groups with the service boards to advance those regional priorities by subject area as we work to set NITA up for success. Today, I will give you a brief update on these efforts, and we will be back in March with further updates. By subject area, here are the 5 working groups that we have established: budget, both operating and capital, fares, transit service, land use, rider information, and an overarching leadership committee. All are RTA staff led and have service board participation, and most groups are meeting every other week. We kicked off the working groups with the service boards with the following goals. We are focusing on identifying timelines, issues, and critical decision-making points for early NITA priorities that are due by or before the beginning of next year. We're defining quick wins for riders and cost estimates to advance them so staff can advance the planning and implementation work before the early deadlines arrive. We will likely bring a budget amendment to the board later this spring to fund these priorities. We are also looking a bit further out to the longer-term NITA priorities and discussing timelines and potential issues with the service boards. And finally, as we established the working groups as a forum, we are hopeful that other stakeholders, like IDOT as an example, can and will join as we move forward with the NITA transition. Additionally, public safety is an obvious complex topic requiring higher level coordination in the near term to determine the next steps with transit and the external agencies. A staff working group might be needed at a later time to pull together timelines, scope, and costs for specific strategies, such as a regional incident reporting app. As you are aware, and as shown on this slide, after the legislation takes effect on June 1st, the Cook County Sheriff's Office will establish the NITA Law Enforcement Task Force via intergovernmental agreement in coordination with the Chicago Police Department, Metra Police Department, Illinois State Police, and the County Sheriff's Office within the region. We have engaged with the Cook County Sheriff's Office to begin initial discussions on this process, and this remains a key early priority. And as you will hear later today from the CTA, we will continue to explore how RTA can best support CTA and others in bringing resources to enhance the public safety. Now I will briefly go through each working group to give you a few highlights of the early meetings. Starting with the budget working group, it has met twice with the goal of producing a potential 2026 budget amendment by consolidating the recommendations of the other working groups. This amendment will allocate a portion of the more than $300 million of new NITA funding, which was intentionally left unallocated with the November funding amendment and December board adoption. The amendment could include expenses for service to be added later in the year, as well as rider enhancements regarding safety and security. The group is also focused on statutory changes that will impact the development of the 2027 operating budget, NITA's first. An earlier than normal budget adoption of November 30th is in effect for this budget cycle only, and that requirement will necessitate moving most of the steps of the 2027 budget process earlier, with the service budget and capital program submittals due to NITA as early as September. We are working closely with the service board budget teams to develop an achievable budget calendar which conforms to these new requirements. A critical path for executing that earlier timeline will be timely adoption of the 2027 to 2031 funding amounts. As you are likely aware, the operating funding formula has been greatly simplified for 2027 and beyond. All operating funding sources now comprise a single pool of funding. So the old labels of sales tax and PTF 1 and 2 are no longer germane to the distribution of funds. Despite the simplicity, there are details to be discussed and understood, and we are doing just that within the budget working group to lay the groundwork for adoption of the funding amounts as early as July. Finally, the group is also working to understand the revised 25% recovery ratio requirement and more in coming months as we gain more clarity on this aspect within the 2027 budget. Sorry. Hold on. Advance the slide too far. Sorry. Turning to the capital portion of the budget working group, there have been two major focuses to date. First, we have given the service boards the task of thinking about how they might prioritize the new funds that were included in the NITA legislation. We expect to report back to the new NITA board early on in their transition so that we can program the first round of those funds later in 2026. Secondly, we have started the process of updating the capital evaluation criteria for the 2027 budget call. This includes adding 2 new themes that are included in the legislation, improving physical access to bus stops, vehicles, and transit facilities, and improvements to service standards. Also, we are working to update the 2 new themes, environmental protection and racial equity and mobility justice. RTA has provided initial suggestions for these themes, and service boards are expected to provide input for our next working group meeting. And we intend to present these updated measures to the RTA board in future months. The FAIRS group has met 3 times. The first meeting looked out further identifying the full scope of reforms in the NITA Act, including consolidation of fare policy and programs at the regional agency, new policies like fare capping and a region-wide income-based reduced fare, and procurement of the next fare payment platform and mobile application. In the meetings since, the focus has shifted toward more immediate actions that need to be advanced now in order to deliver all of these on time. This includes operational planning and cost estimates for a region-wide income-based reduced fare program, which will be an expansion of the existing access pilot launched on Metra last year. Merger of the CTA and the RTA transit benefit programs are also being discussed. CTA is continuing progress toward Ventra 3.0, which will make critical upgrades to the Ventra back office, as well as bring in new hardware across the system, unlocking these new features. And additionally, RTA is working with the service boards to propose a series of policy changes to harmonize the existing programs and passes, again, to better align fares for consolidation. This includes adopting common definition for students, military, and other reduced fare populations, and adjustments to the pass products. Looking a little further out, with some of these immediate actions hopefully complete, fare capping will be possible in the medium term. And lastly, taking preparatory steps for the next regional fare payment schedule and real-time transit customer information application. The Transit Service Working Group has met twice. The group is working to advance service enhancements that can be programmed in 26 and 27 with this new funding. Each of the 3 service boards has undergone planning studies and has a framework in place to program more service. These plans include the CTA bus frequent network, the Metra system network plan, and PACE's revision plan. Additionally, the group is working on regional service planning to adapt these existing plans to better align for the coming changes in the NITA Act. This includes mapping transit use propensity, land use density, and service gaps as outlined in the Act, and evaluating planned service enhancements against these factors. We are also analyzing interagency and modal connections points and how we can optimize the regional network. All of these efforts are taking place now as we are working towards broader reforms that NITA will implement. The 2 biggest changes in the service area is being the development of the regional service plan process and service standards. At the Land Use Working Group, they discussed 2 primary land use related elements of the NITA bill, the People Over Parking Act and the Transit Supportive Development. The People Over Parking Act prohibits local governments from imposing parking requirements on new development projects near transit stations and stops. While this is a state mandate that NITA does not have a formal role in implementing or enforcing, our RTA staff will offer education and technical assistance to local communities, including mapping the impacted areas in coordination with the service boards and CMAP staff and providing technical assistance to update zoning and parking regulations for local communities. The NITA Act also allows the new agency to pursue joint development through the Transit Supportive Development language. RTA staff provided an update on the in-progress joint development study at last month's board meeting. The working group's priority in this area is to complete that study this fall and launch the joint development program in early 27. Related, you will consider a contract amendment for the study later in the agenda. The Land Use Working Group is currently reviewing other potential immediate and medium-term priorities and will finalize their recommendations at the end of this month. Moving on, the Rider Information Group has also met twice, and the focus is on coordinating travel information across the system. Similar to transit service and fares, this group is looking at the immediate and medium actions, lining up resources that will be needed to advance quick wins in 26 and 27 while working toward broader reforms in the NITA Act, which clearly states that customer information will be consolidated and centralized at the regional entity. This group dovetails nicely with an existing RTA planning study. A Better Ride for All was completed in 2025 and includes an action plan. The matrix of strategies is a short list of immediate enhancements the region can make. Additionally, the working group has identified communication coordination for translation services as an additional area where consolidation and coordination can spread resources further. The NITA Act instructs the regional agency to develop a language access plan. And lastly, development of technical standards for information sharing will unlock consistent coordinated customer information. And finally, the leadership working group is scheduled to have its first meeting next week, and we will be back in March to provide you more and further updates on this progress. This concludes my presentation, and happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you. Director.
Thank you so much for that. Just wondering, would you be able to provide us a list of all the members and all of the different working groups?
Sure, the service board staff.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy to provide that.
And then wondering, is there like any possibility to still have recruit like community members or what have you to be part of the working groups?
So at this time, we are keeping it internal to the transit agencies as we try to work on these near-term deadlines. But I think as we kind of continue on and as NITA is established, it might get expanded. But at this point, it's kind of nuts and bolts. And but we will get to a point where we'll want more input. Yeah.
Director Mondero.
Hi, thanks, Jill. Two comments, and thank you for your leadership in working with all these working groups. But you do have a couple slides on public safety. I would recommend that public safety be an actual working group. It's such an important issue and paramount that it be treated that way. The other comment I have is regarding the FAIRS working group. I noticed that one of the immediate actions is Venture 3.0, that CTA is working on it. I've also heard as a board member from RTA staff that during our meetings that there's a lot of criticisms of Ventra, right? And I can say, unfortunately or fortunately, that I was one of the people that was at CTA when we implemented Ventra, right? And so if Ventra is not working, and if Ventra 3.0 is not working, like I hope that the working group is looking at, do you like look at another system? You know, I just don't want us to be going the next 20 years and everyone hates Ventra because the vendor isn't doing what they need for CTA, Metra, and PACE. And so I hope that this opportunity for all of us to come together is a good opportunity for us to say, wait, is this system working? And if not, with advances in technology and who else is out there that can do this product for us. So that's
absolutely, that's on the agenda.
And as we get bigger and consolidated, hopefully they give us the A team. The vendor. Thank you, Dennis. I agree with you. Director Carey.
To follow up on Director Alvarez's comment, well, I understand the nuts and bolts aspect of these working groups. I assume RTA is continuing its, and I can't remember what we called it, the community organizations that we meet with on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
For all the years I've been on the board.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think as we build up into this potential budget amendment, we will start this is why we're kind of giving an update on a monthly basis and kind of keep everybody up to speed and then kind of build to that as well as that forum.
Okay, so to keep them informed of
Yes.
what's coming with NITA too. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we touched last month a little bit on some of the public input and public comment. I didn't touch on this. We can come back in March with kind of as we move forward with that, the communications plan as well.
Director Kuterik.
Thanks, Jill. And this is obviously a really difficult task to find the right balance of figuring out, should we act? How do we act in this interim period? One of the more recent announcements, I think, begs sort of pokes a little bit at that question is PACE announced a whole series of new pilot programs, Wrigley Field, et cetera. CTA presidents announced some things that they want to do as well. And they've got the bus network. I think, you know, we want to make sure we're investing in options, not obligations, not having NITA dig out of a hole. And regional service planning is the new order of the day and collaboration. How can we work together to make sure that those decisions, because we want to have rider benefits right now, but you also want to make sure that you're not locking in NITA into things, that a new perspective of regionally looking at service, for example, if we're having PACE, you know, new bus routes going to Midway, you've got CTA looking at running Midway service a little bit longer, you know, that has to be a decision that's made together so that they connect better. How do we help balance that? You know, it's a difficult question. I don't know your thoughts on it.
I think I would answer with it's a work in progress. I think that is the intention of the service planning working group and sharing information and communication, as well as both from the service board side and our side. So I think we want to continue to make sure that we are aware of those things and how those are happen, how they're included in the previous budget or how they're included in this potential budget amendment. Those are all the things that we're looking for.
I'll just put out a marker too, Chairman. I think for that budget amendment, I agree with Director Mondero. Public safety has to be absolutely the top priority. I think that's the right place for that discretionary funding. And I'll have a really critical eye about the service improvements. I think everyone's eager to just put out service contemplated in the same sort of way that we used to do it, which is I run this one agency. I can put this out quickly. And I think, perhaps waiting a little bit and doing it together could actually provide better service that's more sustainable rather than just sort of quick hits to spend the money.
That is our goal. So agree.
I'd just highlight too, in the little org chart, the boxes that Jill showed earlier in the slide, there was the specific working groups and then there was a leadership group, which is across all 4 agencies as well. And sort of the intention is that those groups push information up to that leadership group to sort of facilitate that kind of cross-pollination across different sort of themes and areas as well as across the organizations. And so that group would be collectively at sort of a senior level of each organization discussing some of those very points before they're kind of incorporated into the actual budget and any budget amendment proposals.
Any other questions or comments? I have one. I've seen correspondence from a gentleman in a firm who helped on debt absorption or consolidation in New Jersey. I would clearly, if you need it, I'll find it for you. But I would talk to that gentleman who, who's lived through some debt consolidation. And as I said earlier, the RTA is going to hand over to NITA probably the highest credit rating you're going to get in a state like Illinois, which is good. But I would look at and see, just to see if that person has any ideas. He's offered to say, hey, this is how you did it or how we did it in New Jersey. And I know, because he stressed to me, the complexity of federal issues and law, which, is very, very complex, that they may know about to, let our legal counsel or whomever's legal counsel look into. But he said, you've really got to look at the federal IRS rules, regulations, and others. And it's not as easy as some people say it's going to be. So
Thanks, Chairman.
that should be
Will
part
do.
of your
Yeah.
work
What I
as well.
didn't mention, obviously, internally, we're looking at a lot of the administrative items that will also need to be transitioned that don't require as much service board coordination. So that is also going on internally.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Jill, very much. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Moving on, item 6C is the capital planning, programming, and prioritization overview from Brian. Mr. Lowenberg, morning.
Good morning, Chairman Dillard and members of the board. I'm Brian Lowenberg, Manager of Capital Programs here at RTA, and I'm here to provide a quick informational presentation of our existing capital planning and prioritization processes and to provide information on available tools, analyses, and reporting as our region prepares for the implementation of the NITA Act. As part of the NITA Act, there are significant changes in the regional capital programming space. In addition to $180 million in new annual funding, the legislation further empowers the regional agency to strengthen the prioritization process. Today, I'll walk you through the current method to build the regional capital program each year, as specified in the RTA Act, changes that we've implemented over the past 5 years to strengthen the capital programming process, and areas that will need to evolve based on new NITA legislation. To date, significant work has gone into improving the capital programming methodology, from instituting a regional project evaluation process to improving transparency around the capital program by sharing more details in both the budget book and RTAMS, which is RTA's mapping and statistics website, about the projects in the program and how they're evaluated. This past work has laid a strong foundation to continue improving the process as required in NITA legislation. Let's walk through some of the steps we've taken to get here and some of the work we'll need to accomplish in the near future. First, let's take a high-level overview of the capital process under RTA and the changes we expect under NITA. Currently, both RTA and the service boards work together to identify funding needs and availability. Both the service boards and RTA are empowered to issue bonds to meet the need. As projects move from concept to reality, the service boards plan the projects, then move them into their capital programs, which are approved by their boards. At that point, they move to the regional capital program, where RTA conducts and publishes regional evaluations and then brings the regional capital program to the RTA board for approval. Now let's look at some of the key changes under NITA. NITA and the service boards will still work together to identify funding needs, but NITA will be more responsible for funding availability. NITA will be empowered to issue bonds to meet the need, and the service boards will not be able to issue bonds for new projects. CTA will have an exemption to continue to issue bonds for red-purple modernization and the red line extension. As projects move from concept to reality, NITA will be responsible for planning large projects, which NITA will assign to service boards or other regional entities to construct, and the service boards will still plan smaller projects. Service boards will continue to propose projects to be included in the capital program, but NITA will have more evaluation and prioritization responsibilities moving forward. NITA will put together the regional capital program based on the project evaluations and the newly developed prioritization method, and then the NITA board will approve the regional program. Now let's take a look at some of the current processes and ongoing improvements at RTA. In 2021, the state passed an act which required all state-funded transit projects to be evaluated using 7 key criteria. These evaluations were included to help prioritize funding in a time where even with the new Rebuild Illinois funds, there were not enough capital dollars to bring the system to a state of good repair while also accomplishing other key objectives. Looking at these criteria helped to explain what we could accomplish with existing funds and what areas needed an additional injection of capital to accomplish these goals. Let's take a look at how we work to implement these evaluations. RTA decided to use the strategic plan development process to gain input from the public, service boards, and CMAP. A capital working group was set up to focus on project evaluation and prioritization with the result of 3 key outcomes, which I'll discuss here. First, the group decided that the existing priority project list would be maintained. The priority project list was first introduced as part of the previous strategic plan, Invest in Transit. The priority project list contains key projects service boards intend to advance as funding becomes available and helps demonstrate the unconstrained need for funding to both maintain and improve the system. The list is updated annually as priorities and costs change, and the annual list is included in the budget book to show the regional need for funding and changes that are occurring. In addition, all projects that are in the capital program are grouped by the priority project that they are addressing in both the budget book and on RTAMs, which shown here is how the priority projects are shown on RTAMs. Throughout the presentation, I'll use an example project, Metra's zero-emission train sets, to help you see how it all fits together. The zero-emission train sets are in Metra's priority project, Next Gen Regional Rail Fleet. RTAM shows that the project is funded with $236 million in 2026 and receives $747 million in the 5-year capital program. Overall, the 10-year funding need for this project is $2.2 billion, leaving about $1.5 billion unfunded. If you click the plus on the left-hand side, you will also see which projects are being funded within each priority. There you can see zero-emission train sets, which have $184 million in funding programmed in 2026 through 2030. The data is also shown in the budget book, which contains information on total funding needed for the project, as well as the amount of funding that is included in the 5-year capital program. Moving on to the second finding, the group determined that all projects in the 5-year capital program should be evaluated based on 12 key themes. This included the 7 themes mandated by the state, as well as 5 additional themes that came from public input and service board recommendations. As the working group reviewed these key themes, it became clear that having a wide range of evaluation criteria would help to show the value of diverse projects and explain the benefits of different types of projects. The working group found that no project would have strengths in all criteria, but the capital program advancing all goals would make the system stronger. As the prioritization process advances, the new NITA board can help shape which of these priorities are most important, and different metrics can be weighted differently to indicate their importance to the region. For example, with such a great need for state of good repair projects, a higher value could be put to that theme. Let's take a look at how we share some of these metrics. Here we can see how the metrics appear in the budget book appendix. Each capital project is listed with the evaluations based on all 15 criteria. At the beginning of the appendix is a detailed description of each metric and the possible evaluation criteria that can be assigned. Back to our example of zero-emission train sets, we can see that some of the key areas this project receives high marks on are reduction in operating cost, increase in accessibility, and reduction in climate impact. Similarly, all evaluation data is available for each project on RTAMS, and users can filter the list of projects based on specific evaluation criteria. And now let's look at the last finding. The final goal was to increase public engagement through information sharing. The goal here was to help inform the RTA board, riders, and legislative partners of the work we are doing to evaluate and prioritize projects as we build the capital program. And let's look at a little bit of that information sharing that we've done. We've included additional information in board presentations to discuss how the program is meeting the different metrics. As mentioned before, we've updated RTAMS and the budget book to include significant details about the capital program, including the evaluations, mapping, and details on priority projects, and shown here is one of the projects that's been mapped out on RTAMS. So to help fit this all together, let's look at how the capital program is built each year. In the winter, RTA prepares the budget call. Each year, we tweak the evaluation measures to include any lessons learned from the previous year, as well as to provide updated guidance to ensure that projects are evaluated consistently across the region. For example, in the 2026 to 2030 evaluation guidance, we updated the operating cost measure to better differentiate projects with a significant reduction to operating costs versus projects that are making a smaller impact, helping to demonstrate which projects significantly move the needle in this metric. In the spring, the budget call is presented to the board for review and approval. The budget call contains all details for evaluating projects in a guidance document, which is included in the materials that the board reviews and approves. During the summer, the service boards put together the capital program using internal processes as well as the regional evaluations. Then, in late September, service boards submit the projects they are proposing and their evaluations. RTA reviews these evaluations to ensure that projects have been evaluated fairly and consistently across the region. Feedback is given and adjustments are made. In addition, RTA verifies that the proposed projects meet any criteria for specific funding sources. Once the final proposal is finished, RTA drafts the budget book, public hearings occur, and the proposed budget is presented to the RTA board in November. Changes are made based on input, and the final proposal is brought to the board in December for review and approval. Once adopted, we get going on the next budget as soon as the calendar turns a new year and start planning annual improvements to the process to be more transparent and informative about the program. For the 2026 to 2030 capital program, we continue to add new information. This year about the key regional goals that are being addressed by each project. The goals we analyzed are state of good repair, transition to zero emissions, all stations accessibility, and expansions and upgrades. Each project can be assigned one or two goals. One are, back to our example, zero emission train sets. This project addresses the goal transition to zero emissions. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see how this information was shared in the budget book for the entire capital program. And the bottom, you can see how it is shown on RTAMS for our example project, zero emission train sets. On RTAMS, you can sort and find projects that are addressing specific goals and metrics so you can really drill down and see which projects meet each of the goals. Let's look ahead to some of the tasks we have during the NITA transition. We anticipate working with the state and the IDOT transition consultant to define the new process of creating the new 5-year capital program as outlined in the NITA Act, with incremental updates to the programming process to be included in the 2027 to 2031 budget call and a fully revamped process ready for the 2028 to 2032 budget call. We will look to the board for input on goals for the new capital programming process, including the timeline for when projects are evaluated and enter the program, and guidance on improving the evaluation methods and implementation of prioritization of projects. This spring, we will work to update the capital project evaluation criteria, as Jill mentioned, to include all changes included in the NITA legislation, and plan to present modifications to the evaluation guidance to the board ahead of the budget call. In the second half of the year, we will be looking for the board to help articulate priorities for how to allocate and program new capital funds expected to come to the region with the aim to award funds toward the end of the year. Moving in 2027, we will need to have a new process in place for the 2028 budget call. In addition, we will need to prepare documentation of the prioritization efforts and publish data on the NITA website, as well as share the methodology in a report to the General Assembly. To wrap up, we will continue to stay engaged with all stakeholders in the process with the goal of meeting all NITA requirements while improving the regional capital programming function. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my report, and turning it back to you for any questions.
Thank you, Brian. Questions, comments, concerns? Director Carey.
Thanks, Brian. Quite a report there, a lot to take in. I'm curious, NITA will conduct early planning of large projects. Is large defined in the act?
I think at this point it's not defined specifically.
Okay, and then we also have been, or the service boards have been for years, maintaining a priority project list, things, their top things to do over a 10-year period. And this is future NITA stuff, but is it, as you look at this, as the working group looks at it, is it likely that a year from now there would be one single priority project list rather than three for each service boards? As we start to try and look at where is it best to spend the money on a regional basis as opposed to service board by service board?
I think the intention is to move in that direction, right? That
To move in that direction.
we're looking at a regional picture rather than,
Okay.
three separate entities.
Okay, okay. Thank you. And if you find out how they define large, be curious, or if they just use the word large in there. I don't know if it means that it affects more than just, just a place that only PACE operates and the other two don't. So just be curious.
And what I will say is they don't mention a dollar amount, right? But they do talk about specific types of projects as to who might be responsible. So we can get you a little bit more on that information. I don't have it right in my notes.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
That'd be useful. Director Alvarez.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that just like earlier, I'd like to see the list of who is in the working group, and also, and more specifically, I guess what I'm also looking for is, since as we all know, the devil's in the details, especially as we're looking and going through all of this, to make sure that there's like representation in terms of like that is reflective of our region, right? So that's kind of what I'm looking for. So if you can just give us that list, and then also, and maybe we can also start. I could just start looking into that, and then maybe we can be an offline conversation afterwards. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Director Kuteric.
Thanks, and I think the question back to us was sort of what feedback in this interim period. I'd say one, I want to really stress how important this process is and how much progress the region has made in RTA in particular. These are billions and billions of dollars, and I think it's really essential to build trust in this process. And right now is a great time to get as much input as possible from stakeholders. I think that trust is really important, particularly with the General Assembly, because we've seen over the last few years sometimes an earmark of funding for a specific project. Seen that with, I think, Clybourne Station for some planning. The NITA bill has a blue and green line in it. And I think if you can build trust in a process that really is evaluating things in a transparent way, that heads off an instinct. You're never going to get away with it completely, for sure. But I think it really, if you can get that input, it heads off having funding just allocated right off the top statutorily, and getting that legislation or that input from legislators is important. Last recommendation is, I'd say, we've got a success in the region with CMAP. They allocate and prioritize projects through a whole host of different federal funding sources, CMAC, STP, TAP. Regional process, everyone feels bought into it. You don't see that funding getting earmarked in the General Assembly. And I think the more that we can incorporate the best practices from them and get them involved in the process could be helpful.
Excellent suggestion. Anybody else? Brian, thank you very much. And I just want to thank our staff for your continuing work and cooperation for a smooth transition between us and NITA. So thank you very much. And they're working on this stuff day and night, so to make a smooth transition. Nora, Madam President, come on up if you would, and thank you for being here as always, whenever we need you. But item 6E is safety and security discussion with the CTA. Tom's following. So we have the financial genius and the leader of the CTA. Welcome, Nora, as always.
Thank you. Good morning. Hi, Chairman and Directors. Good to see you and check in on a really important topic of safety and security on CTA. Today, I'm going to walk through a couple items. I'm going to start, I know you received or should have received a memo regarding information that you'll see in the performance measures update later in your regular update, but I think I'll start there because it's about effectiveness of our security investments, which I know is an important topic for everyone. And it really kind of outlines some of the recent work we've been doing in 2025 and into 2026 in the way that we work with our law enforcement partners and with our security guards to target resources on our system in a meaningful way. And we track the outcomes of that work. I think traditionally you talk a lot about crime and activity on CTA as a whole system. Given the vastness of our system, I've taken the approach to make sure we're looking at targeted work based on the incidents that we see and seeing the impact that we see in those stretches. So I'll start there just to kind of walk you through the information that you received there. You did receive a memo related to the missions that we do on the red and blue line, as well as the smoking missions that we started in 2025. So I want to just kind of give those as examples of some of the impacts that we've seen there across both crime data and customer complaints, which are two of the primary but not only things that we look at to see the impact of our work. So beginning in April 2025, CTA implemented targeted red line missions on the overnight from 2 p.m. to 6 a.m. the following morning at all stations starting in Cermak, Chinatown, all the way down to 95th Street. This involves K-9 guards and is supported by the Chicago Police Department. This was also done in coordination with our union partners on the rail side, ATU 308, looking for supportive employees that are working the overnight in those stations on the red line. Since the start of this effort last April, what we see is that crime on the south branch of the red line has decreased 14% compared to the same time frame from the previous year. So some positive results being seen from that effort. We also look at our customer service complaints, and we see they've also decreased. So in 2025, security complaints on the red line went down by 19%, while overnight security complaints went down by 26%. And we really have a lot of different kinds of data that we can look at for effectiveness. As I've said, the primary ones are crime data, customer complaints. We also have our chatbot. We also have information that we have just from running our system through our control center, through reported incidents. We get input from our employees at wrap sessions throughout the system, and we regularly talk to them about what they're experiencing as well. So the second type of mission is on the blue line. We do code of conduct missions. Those began in March of last year. This is where CTA's K-9 officers, supported by CPD, monitor the blue line trains every weekday morning from 6 a.m. through 2 p.m., addressing instances of violations of CTA's code of conduct. We've seen customer complaints on the blue line decrease regarding peddling, panhandling, and soliciting. They've reduced by nearly half in 2025. And additionally, crime on the blue line has gone down 16% in 2025 compared to 2024. So our aim there is to follow that investment, that tracking, and to ensure that we're seeing numbers headed in a better direction. The last type of mission I'll talk about that's in this memo is around smoking, which of course got a lot of attention in 2025 as an issue on CTA, which we've approached in a dynamic way, not only through missions and ticketing, but also through messaging from our operators on the rail cars, through posted signage and messaging that way as well throughout our system. It's a complex issue that we continue to work on, but I wanted to share that the anti-smoking missions that occurred in CTA for 2025, they occurred 2 to 3 times a week during peak hours. And the locations of those missions are informed by information we get from our chatbot as well as from our customer complaints. We have seen in 2025 a decrease of 14% in smoking complaints. So some steps in a good direction. We continue to work on that issue and keep our foot on the gas across many fronts to continue to improve that for CTA. The last thing mentioned in your memo, because I know there was a particular desire to have additional information accessed directly from the dashboard, we are going to put a link to the publicly available data from the Chicago Police Department related to CTA crime. That'll be right through that information as well and accessible there. So happy to talk more about kind of that particular effectiveness aspect, but I wanted to just kind of continue in a general way with some aspects of security. So you just heard a bit of crime numbers and customer service complaints, but we've really deepened our relationship with the Chicago Police Department over the past year, and you see that come out in different activity numbers as well. So in 2025, the police department issued nearly 17,000 tickets on CTA, and that's up 45% from the previous year. So I just want to give a sense of that, that indication of activity, presence, engagement, monitoring of rider behavior, managing of rider behavior on our system. And we see that come through in those numbers. They've also increased their checks on the system. Those are checks when they come on the rail system and check in with employees. Those are up nearly 10% in 2025 from 2024. And I just give those as examples of the work underway and how we monitor that activity and target it in a meaningful way. Moving from law enforcement, though, I wanted to use this opportunity to talk a little bit about non-law enforcement, which is also an important component of our security strategy. Because CTA, as I think I've told you before, but I just want to take a few minutes to kind of give some more detail because there's active work underway around our Safe Ride Specialist program. Also, this is an example of a small-scale pilot fully intended to inform the work around transit ambassadors in the NITA bill. So an example of CTA kind of dipping its toe in the water, getting working on a small-scale pilot that we know will have some impact on the transit ambassador program so that we come to those discussions with some fresh information on work that's underway on our system. And it goes back to work that started last year. So in August 2025, as you may know, CTA held its first ever transit community safety workshop where we had over 40 partners in behavioral health, community engagement, labor, and public safety all in one room to discuss innovative solutions that better support riders and address security systems concerns on the system. So coming straight out of that workshop, and it was focused, that day-long discussion was focused around creating a pilot initiative of non-law enforcement work on CTA. Where we stand right now is that we're moving forward with 2 small-scale pilots, one focused specifically on crisis intervention on CTA, another focused specifically on violence interruption on CTA. And I think when you look at the sphere of issues that you see on CTA, the dynamic issues that come up, this is a really important, notable step for us to be leading this discussion. And I do think that CTA, we are a transit agency, but we can play a very strong role in facilitating conversation around this issue, bringing people together to come up with creative, innovative ways to address various issues. So the Safe Ride Specialist pilot teams are needed to enhance on-system presence and visibility of support resources, while seamlessly integrating with CTA's existing transit security ecosystem. And that's one of the reasons I say that CTA should facilitate these conversations. When you start to talk about truly putting people on the system that help vulnerable riders, help people in need, you have to talk about the operational realities at CTA. We're moving trains, we're moving buses in real time on live rail. And so when it's a unique environment for a lot of these specialists and workers to be in. So I'm particularly excited about this pilot kind of informing that aspect of what NITA intends to have ambassadors come on the system, that we think about the reality of working on a live transit system in that way. The goal of the pilot is to provide meaningful services for riders experiencing crisis and mitigating unruly behavior or other incidents before it becomes a larger, potentially violent situation. In higher risk situations, timely and effective intervention response can significantly reduce the potential risk and impact on riders and on transit operations. And this is actually a point I want to keep making. We talk a lot about security as if it's distinct from our service delivery. It's absolutely not. So over half of our major delays on CTA are related to passenger disturbances. So when you manage security, when you manage the riders on CTA, you provide better service. And as we continue this security discussion, I'm going to be looking to make that link because I think it speaks to the investment in security going beyond just the initial aspects that people consider. So the two pilots moving forward, the crisis intervention pilot seeks to compassionately engage and connect riders experiencing mental health crises, substance use challenges, and other vulnerabilities to supportive services and to promote a safe and welcoming space for our riders and employees. The second one, the violence interruption pilot, seeks to effectively engage with groups of youth and young adults to promote a safer, more welcoming transit environment and to discourage disruptive incidents that occur on the system, sometimes in late afternoons or in the evenings on CTA. So we are actively working on putting this together. CTA received multiple applications for both pilot initiatives that closed on Tuesday of this week. We're actively reviewing those applications and will begin the second phase of in-person presentations from selected applications beginning the week of March 16th. We received 11 applications for our crisis intervention pilot and 5 for the violence interruption pilot. And that was after holding an info session that had over 60 attendees. So it just gives you a sense of the active work in this area and the exciting, moves that we can make from where we sit. We're looking to launch the pilots by late summer, and we hope these help inform the NITA discussion right at that time. And again, the scale is smaller. The exact number would be determined by the proposals that we get, but we're talking, we budgeted about 20 individuals for this work on CTA. It's not a giant scale, but that's intentional to pilot this, learn from it, and inform that discussion moving forward. The last topic I wanted to update here, something we don't get to dive into a lot, but I know is top of mind for many people, is related to our unhoused population that we see on CTA. And this is absolutely related to security in terms of the vulnerability of these individuals on CTA themselves. Too often, the unhoused population are often victims of crime on CTA. So talking about them related to that is an important connection to make. And as a reminder, CTA funds $2 million a year in an IGA with the Department of Family and Support Services for outreach specifically on the red and blue line, our 24-hour lines where we see more significant presence of unhoused population on CTA. There are 2 outreach teams that ride the trains and visit stations to engage individuals. Thresholds conducts outreach and services on the red line from Monday to Friday, and Haymarket conducts that outreach and services on the blue line for 7 days a week. These outreach teams offer case management and connections to support services such as substance use disorder support, healthcare services, and connections to shelter or housing as available, as well as basic necessities that allow outreach workers to connect and successfully engage with those being supported. So those are things like hygiene products, clothing, and harm reduction materials. We also have a partnership with the Chicago Department of Public Health and CDPH, and they fund the Night Ministry, who conducts overnight outreach on CTA, both at Howard on the red line and Forest Park on the blue line. So that IGA has existed for a few years, and that work has been underway. In 2026, in our budget that was approved, we did set aside $1.65 million through DFSS to fund beds in shelters that are specifically dedicated to individuals who need shelter from CTA. This was a move that we directed based on our experience over the years in this work, that it's critically important for there to be a place that you ultimately have someone who accepts outreach to go to. And again, that CTA plays a role in creating that ecosphere that allows that successful outreach. So this is underway with DFSS. They would be running the RFP later this year to find the areas that would be able to have those beds dedicated to CTA. We currently have that on a small scale. This expands it to a number of 30 beds in a shelter atmosphere that DFSS would find. I also just want to give a sense, again, this topic, we don't always get to talk about numbers, and this isn't exactly related to security effectiveness, but again, to give some data around this. So since we began this IGA in 2023 with DFSS, just to give you a sense, there's been 376 placements in shelter from CTA. And 211 of those placements, and these individuals are tracked and followed by these organizations, you know, in this way so that we understand effectiveness. 211 of them have found permanent stable housing as a part of their outreach on CTA. And, you know, just to give a breakdown, on the red line, that's shelter placements of 260. On the blue line, that's 116 total. So I share this just to give a sense. I think sometimes people wonder what work is underway. It's hard work. It's time-consuming work. I've traveled to New York before to look at the way they work with their unhoused population. I think anyone that works in this area knows it requires a ton of commitment of resources, of time, of relationship building, of connections between city agencies. But we're dedicated and committed at CTA to continuing to move this forward. And I raise it here because I think it often is an afterthought when we talk about the security on our system, but it's an important component of the work that we do from a non-law enforcement perspective with these social service agencies. That concludes what I was going to cover today. I'm happy to discuss anything further.
Thank you very much. It's very useful. Questions, comments? Director Colson.
We have found our K-9 officers to be an effective resource on CTA, and we've continued to invest in them over the years. They were part of the increase that occurred in 2025. We increased our K-9 officers 10% as we closed out 2025 because we've seen some effectiveness there in terms of working collaboratively with the police, and employees also establish relationships with our K-9 officers and appreciate their existence on the system.
The beauty of those canines is they have a nose that's about 10,000 times more powerful than us. And they smell not only drugs, but they smell firearms as well, I believe. I've been told. And, you know, so those canines are really, really remarkable, you know, compatible security measure for us. Any other questions, comments? Obviously, you heard Director Koteric, because I saw you in here, you know, just about how important safety is. The one thing that always jumps out at me when I am out there speaking to groups is, number one, the geographic size of the CTA. It's like a small country. So the geographic square miles of activity that the CTA provides is massive. And then I just saw a front page Sun-Times story a couple weeks ago that says the homeless population a little greater than we thought, but 58,000 homeless friends of ours in our community. So just the sheer size is remarkable, Noreen, as you know. And those extra beds are just crucial. And, you know, when I see your employees, they always go, we signed up to be the operators of a transit system, but we're also all mental health workers and we're security workers, and, you know, your operators and your employees are so, they have so many duties, let's put it that way, in today's society. So really appreciate the pressures that you operate under. And then there's no substitute for the CTA president riding the lines, being out there talking to people, and that's not lost on the community, especially your riders. They see that every day, and thank you for doing that. I know how dedicated you are to, you know, to being out there amongst your employees, but also importantly, the riders. That's symbolism, and it's more than symbolism. It's your listening, but it's really critical, and it's very much appreciated, Nora. Any other comments? Yeah, Director.
Thanks so much for being here more and explaining, you know, the programs. They're really great programs, but and it's good to hear that law enforcement, you guys have a good relationship, you know, with them. I mean, that's, you know, the ultimate, you know, importance, you know, because without these safety enhancements, you know, it's going to be just an overall negative impact, as we all know, to the whole transit system overall. you know, and it is a shame that there is that, you know, lack of respect for law enforcement nowadays, and, you know, dogs are outshining law enforcement officers, but, until we have that cultural shift overall, you know, we're always gonna have, you know, the crime unfortunately, but at least we are making the necessary inroads. So thank you.
Thank you. And Director Gorman, you were reminding me, I didn't mention the newest type of mission we're doing with law enforcement. So that started in January. It's called a TRIP mission, is the acronym, stands for Transit Rider Interaction Program. And this is where 6 to 8 officers line a platform. They're at each station for an hour at a time, and they get on and off each train as it passes. And I raise it, and your comment made me think of it because the sentiment behind it is to have a different type of engagement with the law enforcement officer through that. It's kind of a check-in with riders. It's not an incident that's occurred. It's not to ticket or engage in that way, but to just kind of check in, look around the car, see if anybody needs any help in any way. And just since the end of January, we've had over 200 of those missions. I do think you know, the point is to also create visibility to come out in a group, because as you're mentioning, Chairman, the vastness of our system is such that even a grand number of police officers could not be everywhere. I mean, in the rush hour at CTA, just to give a sense, we've over 1,000 distinct rail cars out. We have over 1,500 buses, right, out at PM rush hour. So when you think about covering that type of system, you have to be targeted and dynamic and strategic. And that latest kind of mission has been impactful, and we're watching it closely.
And those trip officers, it's interesting to watch the riders interact with them. And I love it when the riders thank the police for being there, and it's good for the morale of the police department, who are under siege every day as law enforcement officers. So it's great that people see it. They know we have the 6 officers generally on trains getting off and on, and it's really, really important. And again, while dogs are great, and so are the contract employees that handle the canines, there is no substitute for the Chicago Police Department. I mean, they are the sworn law enforcement officers that have arrest powers, and you know, they are just critical. And I thank them for every time they step up and ride the system or be out there on the system or answer a call, which is all too frequent, unfortunately, in today's world. Yes, Director Monduro.
Thanks. I want to publicly acknowledge all the hard work that Acting President Nora Learson is giving to public safety. Nora, you and I have spoken multiple times with your senior leadership team. You mentioned all the sensitivity around the unhoused. I want to point out that the pilot that the CTA is doing with thresholds, like they're also giving dignity to the unhoused, and it's just such an important component. I'm hopeful that as you look at these pilots, as you look at and continue your conversations with the Cook County Sheriff's Office, with the Illinois State Police, you find out what bandwidth they have to like divert their extra officers for overtime or whatnot. Just similar to Jim Derwinski coming and saying, "Hi, RTA board, want to put a placeholder for you to think about, like funding the bridges," you know, like that while NITA starts up later in the year, once you can figure out with the sheriff's office, with CPD and the state police, how we can get additional officers to the front lines of CTA, that I would happily be the person in motion, and I would call every one of my fellow board members offline, trying to urge them to like have that be on the agenda for next month. So keep doing what you're doing, but I think it's super important for the public that we get this as quickly as possible to the forefront in terms of public safety. And I know that we can do it, and I think that we have the votes to like fund something more immediate for the CTA. Thanks.
Tom, Director Kudera.
Thanks, Chairman. Want to triple down all the things that Director Mondero had said, and Acting President Learson, thank you for the memo on the analysis of the spend. I think the success of the budget amendment to really focus on safety and encourage you to prioritize safety and security in your discussions and preparing your recommendation for additional funding. I think that is directly related to the rigor of the evaluation on what's working. And to the extent that there are best practices or research, if it's Transportation Research Board or APTA or TCRP and your colleagues, figuring out what works best and making that very known in the recommendation, I think is a key to success, and showing the public too that we're putting the dollars where the biggest impact is. One of the places that I think my bias is where there's some impact just from conversations with your executive team and others across the country is on the fare evasion issue. This is not limited to you. We bring this up with Metra as much as any of the other service boards. But in the Bay Area, their legislature had put in a provision that fare evasion be a top priority as a sort of short version of their fiscal cliff fix. And I think we need something similar to that, and a focus on that is really important. Sometimes just getting up ahead before the system sees things inside of it is really one of the very few places you can, I think, see some early returns. And in the Bay Area, they actually evaluated damage, in the system, graffiti, cleanup cost, and put a number to that, and it was way ahead of what anyone expected. So just some thoughts as you prepare that. But thanks for this memo. I think it's a good start and a place to build on.
It's great. Any other questions on fare evasion? I think I told you before, it is a focus of the federal government, and for better or for worse, but I think it's clearly real. They're focused on fare evasion. They believe there's a direct nexus between crime, cleanliness, and other things to fare evasion, and they're all over it. So as you know better than I do, you got to answer to the feds, and they're watching very, very carefully. Anything else? If not, thank you very much. As I said at the City Club when I had the honor of being your interviewer there a couple of weeks ago, if you just want some comfort on the security level, and she sat as a member of the RTA board, State Treasurer Judy Bartopinka would say, nobody's more concerned about safety than a mom who takes her kids on the CTA. And so, I just tell folks in my presentations, look, Nora's a mom. She rides the system, and she gets the security issues that are out there, and she's out there firsthand every day with her staff dealing with it. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
Direct-
Chairman.
Mr. President.
Thank you, directors.
Madam President. All right. Can we move on to action items now? Not that we haven't had all kinds of action already this morning. Where's my page on action items? Here we go. 7A is the results, certifying financial results for the fourth quarter of 2025 and the quarterly performance measures. Malik and Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Hi, everybody. I'll go first, and 7A includes 2 items for you to vote on. So after I'm done, I will seek your vote on this first portion and then turn over to Sarah for the quarterly update. So I'm Malik Vaishnav, Senior Deputy Executive Director of Planning and Capital Programming. And as you have seen every quarter, I'm up here to generally provide an update, informational update, but this time seeking your vote on the omnibus performance measures and reporting that CT, Metra, and PACE have done over the last couple of years as part of the state law. And so we'll be seeking your vote to certify that they're in compliance and then forward that information over to the state. So to give some background, as we have a couple of new board members, legislation enacted in 2023 required that the RTA service boards, CT, Metra, and PACE publish monthly operational performance measures, and that for the RTA board to annually certify that they're in compliance of reporting on these specific items. So I won't read through everything, but the data requirements put forth were on staffing, service, and public safety, Nora just made my job easier on that portion, covering some of the public safety components. And the idea is that if RTA board fails to certify or votes that CTA, Metra, and PACE are not conforming to this, it would put the $70 to $20 million a year of reduced fare reimbursement on hold. The state would not reimburse that funding. So this vote would be the end of the legislation only required that for 2 years. It's no longer in effect in 2026. However, NITA Act will be coming on board, and there's an expectation of a centralized reporting from the central agency on the same information. And until then, CTA, Metra, and PACE are committed to updating these dashboards in 2026, even if the requirement has a little bit of a gap. So I'll quickly, again, walk you through what the screenshots of each agency's dashboards look like, and then today spend a little bit more time on what has happened over the 2 years, because we are more interested in the outcome of the numbers than the numbers themselves. So again, this is CTA's very detailed dashboard covering many parts of their operations, going way beyond the immediate requirements of the legislation. Again, there's a screenshot of a part of Metra's. They created a web page and are reporting on all of the measures. And again, I'll get into them in a minute. And the memo includes a lot of the details, but this shows a screenshot of their service delivery that they report. And then here is a portion of PACE's where they're reporting both from a perspective of a web page, but also a rider can go there. Anyone in the public can go here and download a spreadsheet and get really detailed data if you're a transit nerd and really want to dive into their service delivery. So the service boards have come a long way over the last 2 years in enhancing this reporting, working with us every quarter. And then we obviously also have our own reporting from the RTA, but we try to make it higher level because we are focused on sort of the 30,000 foot level than getting into the specifics. But on the 3 items, staffing, service, and public safety, what has happened over the 2 years? Because the goal again at 3 years ago was that we needed to come out of the hole of poor service delivery and other issues out of COVID. So what has really happened? So on staffing, here you see the net operator headcount that has increased over the last couple of years. So CTA bus operator headcount has grown from 3,800 approximately to 4,276 in December of 2025. So again, CTA is completely and fully staffed on bus and going above and beyond. This is really important because this should be the focus of the agencies right now, because NITA Act provides more funding to add service. So not only do we need to hit our numbers on the service that's out there, but then we'll be adding more service in the coming years. CTA rail operator headcount has now finally reached closer to 880 and matching the 2019 levels. Metra has 478 operational staff, what they call train staff. It's 38 more than they need to operate service, even though they have seen some attrition over the last couple of years. So they are currently well staffed to provide the service that they schedule. PACE has hired 154 net new bus operators since Jan 2024. Their current headcount is 1137. So it's 94% of their budgeted level. So they have a little bit of ways to go to fully staff for the services that they're providing. And then moving to service delivery, again, this chart kind of shows that the 2 top lines of Metra and CTA bus over the last 2 years, they are meeting their schedules at 99 to 100% of what they're scheduled. They're putting their schedules out completely. PACE is following that again in the 95% range with a little bit of variability. Our issue is CTA rail. It is not delivering scheduled service. It has fluctuated between 80 and 95%. So there was a lot of progress made. There's some weather issues, and as you heard, different things from acting president right now. However, our focus for the last few months is that after reaching a high of 90% for 2025 in September last year, it has declined back closer to 80. So for CTA to sort of get these numbers up, they really need to deliver their scheduled red and blue line service. Safety and security, again, you heard a lot of things from CTA that, again, makes my presentation easier, but there's sort of the federal reporting that happens on sort of safety and security incidents. These are very specific type that impact transit operations. So this does not include like a, basic robbery or an incident. I'll get into that in a minute. But what we see over the 2-year trend is that we continue nationally to stay below 1 incident per 100,000 revenue miles. So this is how they sort of evaluate nationally. And there's only been one time that CTA bus exceeded that in July of 2024. However, we are looking at several different ways to monitor effectiveness and spending. Again, Nora covered a lot of this, but obviously we look at all 3 agencies. This shows the contractual expenses. Last time we presented this to you in May of 2025. But our RTA data transparency portal already includes all of this for the public to download and do their own math and see. But we looked at contractual spending on security by agency. So for 2025, the average monthly for CTA was 7.2 million, Metra at 4.1 with police and some other contracts, and PACE at $37,000. So together our region with contractual expenses is at around 136 million a year in spending. And again, with the conversation you just had, there's opportunities to focus and improve on that as part of the budget amendment when we bring that to you. But one of the main things was how do you measure effectiveness? And again, CTA covered some of this, but regionally, what we have done from the RTA side is that our quarterly surveys for the past year have included these questions, like how do you score your satisfaction when we ask you the question, I feel safe when traveling from home to my first station? And again, our goal is to look at a rider experience, breaking it out into different pieces, because transit doesn't control everything here. For example, your walk from home to a bus stop or a station is completely outside of any of our control and really belongs to the general public safety, police department, alder folks, and municipalities. But in general, what we have seen is the numbers have stayed fairly consistent within plus or minus 5%. You can interpret that both ways, and I think both are true, that they would have gotten worse without the investments, but they really need to get better with more investment. So both of those things are true. Our North Star should be above 90% satisfaction, right? Like we should not accept 60s and 50s and 70s as acceptable. And again, this is Chicago Police Department started publishing a transit-specific dashboard last year of the number of crimes that are reported and tagged to CTA as a location. And so our team has dived deep into this information, and we are mapping it out for you here, and we can get into details. Our team can come up and walk you through like which station line is seeing what trends. So the question Director Mondero has asked in the past, but globally for today's presentation, we have seen a few percentage points of decrease year over year. As you can see, the orange bars have generally been the highest of 2024 and 25, 26. Again, however, the goals and the North Star should be how we can cut this into half and things like that. So we're still hovering around similar numbers as previous years and the number of total incidents. So with that presentation, happy to answer any questions, but we are requesting your vote to certify a compliance of reporting of data from CTA, Metra, and PACE over the last 2 years. And again, now this requirement after this vote comes to an end, but we are looking and reviewing the new requirements on performance metrics in the NITA Act that really tries to centralize this information at the regional level. So happy to answer any questions. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Director Carey.
On the graph that shows service delivery.
Yes.
First of all, there was a page about staffing, and then the graph on service delivery. For CTA, it peaked, I guess that's CTA rail. It peaked in August of 24, almost 95%, and then went down, and in December of this last year, it was down as low as almost 80%. What is that based on staffing? Are they still trying to hire people?
They absolutely need to. One of the things that has happened since the pandemic in all of our industries, logistics, transportation, is that there used to be an absenteeism rate or people calling off sick or running into federal level of testing for drug use and other things. Used to be about 9 to 10%. now it's close to 20. So you have to actually overhire to deliver the level of service you need to provide. So that is a big issue. When CTA even gets to 880 operators hired, they probably need like more than 900 to be able to deliver the 2019 level of service. So that is an issue where you need to actually hire a lot more people than you used to need to provide the same level of service. The other thing is in 2024 and 25, CTA added trips to its schedule. So it has continued to add trips to the schedule. However, in a couple of lines, they're unable to fill those trips. So again, that brings us back to the whole conversation about the state giving us $1 billion to add more service for riders. So we need our agencies need to be able to deliver that. And for that, hiring should be the biggest focus for the next 6 months and continuously.
And that's what I suspected maybe, and I'm glad you clarified that. So in August 24, the service being delivered was less than the service trying to be delivered in December.
Absolutely. What is
So they
true?
lost people. It wasn't that they lost tons and tons of people. It increased the service, but didn't have enough.
Right. If you graph the actual number of trips being delivered, it has consistently gone up. So riders are seeing more buses and trains out there. But if you're going to promise a 5-minute headway, you should deliver a 5-minute headway. So that's where I think we are seeing some issues in specific cases.
Okay, but they continue to aggressively hire.
Yes, and we'll continue to push that point as well.
Okay, thanks.
And the $1.5 billion will certainly help frequency for sure. And it's cute, Pat. I have daughters that ride the L all the time. So I get service delivery constantly from my daughters every morning saying I'm on my second train passing me that's standing remotely, as well as reports of marijuana smoking and everything else comes right to dad through here. But it is, it's clearly noted, but the funding will certainly help this for sure. Director Alvarez.
Thank you, Chairman. And regarding the reporting in terms of the staffing, for example, do we ask for any demographic information from any of them? And yeah.
It's a little bit of a mixed bag from certain HR perspective. We want to make sure the operating agency and the employer hiring that information stays compliant with not oversharing.
Yeah.
However, I think the operating agencies do generally break things down at the highest level. So for example, what is the age demographic? What is the race and ethnicity demographic? But the statute doesn't require it, and we have to be a little bit careful that it doesn't violate any human resources or other issue.
Okay.
But the service boards do track it, and RTA tracks it as well, and we submit it on a monthly basis to the state as well.
Director Mondero.
Hi, Malik. Thanks for the information. One comment I have, and it's not sure if it's something that's for Jill or for Malik with Jill with the working groups, but in terms of rider information and public safety, one observation I have complementing Metra is that when you're on a Metra train, there's a lot of signage about how you register a complaint. Like if you see if there's some issue of safety security, there's a bit more uniformity on Metra than there is on CTA. And so as we're going to the NITA model, what conversations are there going on between the staff of the service boards about how to uniformly take in this information? So because we essentially want to have any rider know that, like, just to the chairman's example of smelling pot or witnessing a crime, whatever it is, that people can instantly know how to report it, and that way you could see the data. Because what I fear is that there's things that are going on and they're not being reported, and so how do we capture that in the accurate way uniformly for the whole system?
Yeah, that is exactly the case. A lot of this analysis is based on reportable incidents, and we all experience incidents that we may not know how to report. This has come up in Leanne's conversation with Cook County Sheriff's Office, because statutorily, within 6 months of the effective date of the act, a unified app has to be put out, at least for public safety reporting. And right now, all three agencies do different things. With CTA, you have to know and find the chatbot, or, you know, obviously in situations of complete unsafety, people should call 911. But outside of that, it is sort of different for each. So we are in the heart of those conversations, and whatever budget amendment we bring to you on the public safety side will include how to get there sooner than later.
One of the things, and I haven't debriefed with all of you, but I did meet with our auditors who asked to see me this week. And one of the issues that the auditors just asked about and commended us about was transparency. I mean, there is so much data there if you want to spend hours looking, but it'll be better coordinated. But the amount of transparency is just remarkable. And whether you're a member of the media or a curious member of the public, you can really get a pretty good look at how things are operating off of these dashboards. And it'll only get better, but the amount of transparency is amazing. Just one last comment from me. I obviously get Metra's updates all the time and delays, et cetera. And I kept seeing operational issues pop up on mine. I don't know who else rides Metra or has these. So I called Jim, and going to the absenteeism, I said, so what does operational error mean? And he goes, usually it's a crew issue. And he said, you know, we have a greater absentee rate than we had, and we won't get into discussions on the millennials versus the baby boomers or et cetera in terms of reliability. But he did say he's working on it, especially on the BNSF, which is, those are BNSF employees. Those are Warren Buffett's employees. And so, you know, Jim's on it, but I just said, what's an operational error? And he goes, generally it's a crew shortage. And he goes, and I understand absenteeism, but our employees really need to let us know, you know, if they're sick so that we can get the extra people we have to back it up. But operational errors are generally, he said, crew issues or crew shortages, and they're more than they've been in the past. And you know, your testimony here, Malik, kind of confirms that. Anything else we do? Oh, yes, Director Walker.
Just quick comment, and this is probably a little further down the line, but as you think about this universal way that you can report crime, you know, as a writer, it would be great to have in that same app or whatever it is, a universal information sharing. So I ride Metra, so I get that. But then I don't know if CTA has the same version, but it's confusing for the rider sometimes. So now we have a central place for security, but now other places to go for rider information. So as you're thinking now, perhaps thinking holistically about eventually having rider information to be in that same tool, right? So that so you don't have to revamp something else later. Does that make sense?
That really makes sense. Part of the issue is that about 10 years ago, when these things became really popular, all three agencies provide APIs for any developers to integrate. So it's really, the concept was built that like you as a user will pick your favorite app, and that app has connected their APIs to all three agencies. And then you pick and choose how much you want to see, because it can also inundate you. If you got CT alerts, there would be one coming every 3 minutes or something. So those functionalities are available that CT, Metra, and PACE provide those links to third-party developers. The question now is the legislation is very clear that they're expecting a single point of information as the official. And then obviously people can go out to the marketplace, and like I fully use transit app. I don't use the Metra app personally. So I think a lot of those things will evolve with NITA for sure.
And it's amazing. I mean, this is Metra Cops. And you know, if you're sitting in the upper deck of a train and you think there's a problem and you don't want to say anything, but you want to report it, you could use that. And then there's the red button where it really calls the Metra Police. But if you see something, you know, when you don't want to say something or call attention to it, you know, I think what NITA will do with, you know, coming up with some kind of app like that, is going to be really, really outstanding and helpful and make people feel more secure and will literally make the system more secure. So I need a motion and a second to approve these, so
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
the motion, second, Director Walker or Director Groven, either one, Joey is fine. And with that, Leanne, you want to call the roll?
Yeah, so this is, we've actually got the two items here. We've got, this is on the performance metrics, on certifying the performance metrics and the data, and then there's the second one on the financials. So we can take the vote just on the performance metrics first, and
Yeah,
then we
let's
can
do-
just,
do
after Sarah does her
7A.
presentation, we can do the vote.
Yep.
So we want to do them individually?
Yeah, please.
Okay. All right, Director Alvarez, Director Carey,
Aye.
Director Colson, Director Gorman,
Aye.
Director Groven,
Aye.
Director Jenkins,
Aye.
Director Katara,
Aye.
Director Mondero.
Yes.
Director Rotondo.
Yes.
Director Ryan,
Yes.
Director Sonoyka.
Aye.
Director Walker,
Aye.
and Chairman Dillard. Chairman Dillard.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, okay.
I was showing Director Colson the Metra Cops app, telling him he
We
needs to
have,
get it.
13 ayes.
Thank you. And that 7A is approved. Thank you very much. Let's move on to 7B.
No, no. No,
And,
we've still got to do the financial
oh yeah, we
piece
got to
of
do the
this, of
financial piece
7A.
of this, right?
Yes.
Still 7A,
Sorry, 7.
not 7B.
Sorry, 7A.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Directors. I'm Sarah Rubino, Principal Analyst here in the Budget Division. Today, I'll be asking the Board to certify the Service Board's financial results through the fourth quarter of 2025 against the adopted operating budgets. These recommendations are based on unaudited financial results as reported to the RTA by the Service Boards. We will inform the Board if the audited results, once received, differ materially from these unaudited results. Let's look at our primary metric for evaluating substantial accordance with budget, the operating deficit performance. CTA Metra and Pace Suburban Service each continued to report favorable to budget operating deficits ranging from about 4% to 13% due to lower than budgeted operating expense. Now that we're comparing to the amended ADA paratransit budget, that operating deficit result through the fourth quarter was 3.2% favorable. The system-wide operating deficit of the service boards, including ADA, was about $2.9 billion. This regional result is $189 million, or 6.1% favorable to budget. Accordingly, staff recommends a finding of insubstantial accordance with budget through the fourth quarter of 2025 for the results of the CTA, Metra, Pace Suburban Service, ADA Paratransit, and the region as a whole due to favorable operating deficit performance. The ADA Paratransit $9.9 million operating deficit variance represents a preliminary estimate of the ADA funding surplus, which could exist at year-end. This result indicates that the action plan implemented during the fourth quarter of 2025 was effective. Due to some invoicing lags and accruals specific to ADA, the final surplus may be lower than what is shown here, and it will be retained in the ADA Paratransit Reserve for future use. And just a quick update on the sales tax slide we introduced last month. We've now added the October result of 8.2% year-over-year growth, which may at first appear to be a slowdown versus the previous months. However, the October 2024 base result was unusually high at almost 160 million, which mitigated the growth. The bottom line is sales tax continues to be very strong with double-digit growth for 2025 due to the extension of RTA sales tax to more online transactions. We'll continue to monitor as the sales tax year ends, with lower growth expected to return with the January 2026 results. And that concludes my presentation. Back to you, Mr. Chairman, for any questions and a vote, please.
Thank you, Sarah. Any questions? Let's do the tag team of Director Sonoyka and Director Walker moving and seconding that we approve this particular item. Any questions? If seeing none, let's take a roll call, Leanne.
Director Alvarez, Director Carey.
Aye.
Director Colson, Director Gorman.
Aye.
Director Groven.
Aye.
Director Jenkins.
Aye.
Director Katara.
Aye.
Director Mondero.
Yes.
Director Rotondo.
Yes.
Director Ryan,
Yes.
Director Sonoyka,
Aye.
Director Walker,
Yes.
and Chairman Dillard.
Yes,
13.
thank you. And that is approved. On 7B, we're going to hold off action on this as some discussions are continuing to occur between obviously organized labor and others, looking for and really drilling down on the economics of this. So we're going to hold this off while discussions continue. Let's move on to 7C through 7F. 7C is an ordinance authorizing a contract amendment for energy management and data housing. 7D is an ordinance authorizing a contract for the provision of information technology products related to services. And 7E is an ordinance authorizing an amendment to the consulting contract for a joint development study. Any questions on any of these? Yes, Director Colson.
Director Colson, can you use your mic just for the recording purposes? Sorry.
Items 7C, D, and E all involve contracts that go well past next June 1. Can we get some assurance from our council or from somebody that we have the power to bind NITA to these contracts? Under the statute, does it talk about the transition? Oh, here comes our council. Okay. Thank you.
That's a good question.
Sure. Sorry. So assurance that it can, the legislation does allow us, anything that RTA has entered into will be taken over by NITA. We don't have to worry about re-executing contracts, renegotiating contracts. But in case the NITA board determines that they want to go a different direction, there is termination for convenience language that is in every contract we enter into, which allows us to terminate for any reason at any time. And then separately, there's an appropriations clause in the contract that if the funds are not appropriated by the agency, then that's another reason that we can get out of the contract. So without any penalties to the agency. Hopefully that helps, clarifies.
Good. Any other questions on any of these? So with that, Director Colson moves.
Chairman,
Seconded by, yes.
the travel expenses are also included.
Yeah, I'll do travel after this, or I'll add let's add item 7F, which is the approval of travel expenses. So we can do C through F all together if we can. So Director Colson moves, seconded by Director Groven, that we approve items 7C through 7F. And how about a motion or a roll call?
Director Alvarez.
Aye.
Director Carey.
Aye.
Director Colson. Director Gorman.
Aye.
Director Groven.
Aye.
Director Jenkins.
Aye.
Director Katarik.
Aye.
Director Mondero.
Yes.
Director Rotondo.
Yes.
Director Ryan.
Yes.
Director Sonoyka.
Aye.
Director Walker.
Aye.
Chairman Dillard.
Yes,
13 ayes.
thank you. And C through F in item 7 is approved. Item 8, any new business to come before this august board today? Seeing none, our next meeting will be March 19th, 2026 at 9 a.m. After St. Patrick's Day for a couple of days for all of you to recover who are Irish, Director Ryan and others. So how about a motion and a second to adjourn? Director Cotter.
Seconded, Mr. Chairman.
And seconded by Director Ryan. All those in favor of adjournment say aye.
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 Guys have it, nays, seeing you're all ready to leave, we are adjourned. That motion is approved. Thank you all very, very